Alright guys, it's Charlie Tango 1994 back with another YouTube video. Following up in a series of videos about the radio equipment I've rediscovered in a clear out of my Radio Shack during the lockdown period, another item I want to take a look at today is this little linear amplifier. It came in a box of radio bits I bid on eBay a number of years ago, and the rigs and other items have long since been tidied up and sold on, and even though I've never used it, I've kept hold of it in case I ever need an amp, and because of its size, I'm interested to see if it could be useful when running portable when I need a few more candles when working DX. I've reviewed a couple of other amps on this channel, two from the same manufacturer, RM from Italy, as well as one from Zitaghi, also from Italy. This little model is the KL40, which is at the bottom end of a range of amplifiers they produce, ranging up to the KL805, which adds up to 600 watts on FM and 1 kilowatt PEP on sideband. As I say, this little guy should supply up to 40 watts of additional power, and since I've got the time and other equipment to test it, I thought I'd plug it in to see if it's working and test its power output with the antenna matcher power meter we looked at in my previous video. Taking a closer look at it, there's very little in terms of controls, with just an on and off switch. As with most amplifiers, it has cooling fins all round it, which helps to dissipate the heat it generates when in use. On the underside is a number of stickers carrying warnings which leave you in no doubt that under standard regulations it is illegal to use this amplifier in most countries. Now let's set the amp up to see if it still works and what power we can get out of it. Here I've needed to put the amp in line between the power meter and the radio using two patch cables, which means we can get a reading for the amplifier from the power meter. I also am using two separate power supplies as a standard 5 amp PSU might not be able to support both the radio and the amp at the same time. There are larger PSUs available which allow for larger outputs, but I don't have one available for this video. As I said, this was bought in a box of other bits, so I don't recall if I've ever tested if it actually works. Amps are notorious for breaking, and I've had experience of the crackle and pop, often accompanied by a little puff of smoke when they burn out a component, and there are many reports of this happening when you try and push too much power through the amp. As there are no lights or indicators on the amp, the only way to know for sure if it's working is to test it like this with a power meter. So having set the emitone I use as my home base to transmit at 4 watts, we can check that everything is connected properly and get a reading from the power meter before turning on the amp. So with the gauge set to 10 watts, we can see the needle resting on 4 watts when we transmit from the emitone. Now hitting the power button on the front of the amplifier, let's key up again and see if it makes any difference. As you can see, the needle on the power meter goes off the scale, so the good news is that the amp is working. To get a true reading from the power meter, we'll need to flip the switch to the other scale on the meter and let's see what it's actually giving us. So having changed the scale in the power meter and keying up the emitone, we can see it's hovering around the 20 watt mark. So the good news is that the amp is not burned out and it's working. I'm happy enough with 20 watts for what I need it for, but it's not the maximum I might hope for, and would like to see it showing more than 30 watts. The issue here might be that the amp is not being driven hard enough by the 5 amp PSU, which is important, since if I plan to use it when portable, my only option is to run from batteries, so compared to a larger PSU, I won't get as much out of the car jumper battery I plan to use to power it. If I increase the power from the radio by adjusting the RF power up from 4 watts to 10 watts, then it does increase the total output to 40 watts, as we can see now. So to do a real test, let's change the rig out for the Colt 295 I tend to use for Sid Sunday DX, which I know transmits at less than 4 watts. Now let's connect the amp to the portable battery and let's see how the figures compare to the first test. So here again, we've connected everything up with the Colt 295 as the transceiver and the power amp connected to the battery. Testing the Colt bareback gives just about 3 watts, which is expected. And now let's power on the amp and see what we get. So here we can see the needle hitting 20 watts, which is okay for what I need. It will mean that it will work for a portable station, and is the ideal size and weight to chuck in my radio bag without adding any additional burden. Now that the coronavirus lockdown is just starting to be loosened, and we're now in the throes of summer, I'm going to be making plans to get out fairly soon and do some work portable. Depending on furlough conditions and weather, I may take a relatively local trip up to a couple of high spots near me soon to see what signals I can get. So until then, I'll catch up with you in my next YouTube video. Cheers guys.